why would you want to have boatloads of illegal immigrants coming to your country? It's like £10 million a day for hotels at one point.
How do you end practically illegal immigration?
Well, it's going to sound very complicated, but you turn the boats around. Emily Maitlis, who can't wrap her head around people wanting to lower migration and has to call everyone racist when they do.
Because probably you're racist.
It's just this like emotional scolding. If you look at her face, it looks like she's talking to a dog turd. There's definitely a woke right. Lots of people would be like, oh yeah, I agree with you, but I'm not going to say anything. Now, the reason people get very upset about this phrase is A, it's 100% accurate, and B,
your grandpa was a white slave.
Have you ever heard anyone other than me make that argument? Most people are afraid. They're terrified of saying the thing that I just said.
Spilling milk, that was one of your first memories.
And I got one of these and I was glugging it, and she watched me like pour the milk down myself. And she was terrified because she couldn't really afford anything else. What it did lead me to is to having a very hard shell. And I only realized that probably like a year ago and had to kind of like unpack that.
I've got an urge with you to sort of, I want to pick at things and get to the soft Konstantin.
The underbelly. You are going to die. So what is it that you fear that you won't have the chance to do before that happens? I know friends in Ukraine, they said goodbye to their family and they went back and signed up to fight. That's what you're supposed to do. So for me, I think it's important to stay and fight. There are points of no return, and we are getting closer and closer.
61% of regular Heretics viewers haven't subscribed yet. Can I ask you a favour? If you love these fearless conversations, hit subscribe now because it's free, takes 2 seconds, and powers our mission. Konstantin Kisin, welcome to Heretics.
You really changed. Before that, you were very calm and relaxed, and then you did this like, welcome to Heretics.
You know what?
TV announcement.
It sometimes inspires comic relief. Like Winston Marshall goes bananas when you do that.
Does he?
He goes, what?
It's a very good impression of Winston.
He's a lovely man, isn't he?
He's a great man.
Right. Do you believe Starmer? Do you believe that? What do you think about Starmer? Do you believe
what
him?
a gear change. He was so relaxed before, and now suddenly I feel like in the gold glare.
I could subtly segue, couldn't I? But I sort of I get a frisson.
You could have just kept talking the same way you were talking before.
Yeah, okay.
But then you were like, what about Starmer?
What about...
Do I believe Starmer? No.
I was seeing you talking about it. He's gone quite far, though.
In what sense?
Well, I do wonder. I've got some sympathy for him here because he's found that reform got lots of the votes, and now he's going, okay, I obviously need to, people don't want immigration, I think. I've got to come down. And he's sort of come out sounding a bit like a robot and almost too far, wasn't it? Do you think?
Too far?
Well, it was like, we're coming for you, we're going to get you.
I didn't hear that. I listened to a speech. It sounded like someone saying quite sensible things, but not really believing them at all. Like when I think of Keir Starmer, he always looks like he's like one of those men on a poster doing like a missing cat appeal. That's what he looks like. But it's so incredibly inauthentic that I actually think it's not going to work because I wrote a Substack about this and I did a video about this. My sense is he's attempting to like shoot the reform fox, so to speak. But we all know he's not being authentic. There's no one who cares about that issue, who cares about illegal immigration or mass immigration from low-skill, low-wage countries, let's say, who's going to look at Keir Starmer, listen to that speech that he did, and go, oh, that's Keir Starmer, he's really changed his mind about that, right? And also, and partly because of that, I don't think he's actually going to do the things that he wants to pretend he's going to do. And I certainly don't think he's going to get the results that he needs to actually convince people, not least because I think in order to solve that problem, you actually are going to have to do some pretty difficult things. I mean, if you look at it objectively, every single person in the Conservative Party who at the time they were in office or in government said, oh, we can't leave the ECHR, we've got to do Rwanda, or we got to do this, or we got to do that. They've all since come out, since they are no longer in power, and said, oh yeah, we need to leave the ECHR. Rishi Sunak's a good example of this. He forced out Suella Braverman for talking about needing to leave the ECHR, among other things. And then after he's left office, he's the one saying that's what has to happen. And so is Starmer going to do that? No, he's not going to do that. And what that means is he will not deal with what I think is actually the main issue in this conversation, which is illegal immigration. That's, I think, the thing that gets everyone annoyed. And I include a lot of people who are not traditionally concerned about that issue. But I just think, first and foremost, it's like common sense. Why would you want to have boatloads of illegal immigrants coming to your country? And number two, it costs. The figures change all the time, but it's like £10 million a day for hotels at one point. It might be less now because they've just let them out or whatever, but that was the cost at one point. And third, I think it's a very British thing. It's like, it's really unfair. And these people are jumping the queue, right? So it like offends us culturally as well, I think. At a cultural level, somebody circumventing the rules in order to jump ahead in the queue is just totally unacceptable. So that's the issue that I think if you were really serious about looking credible on immigration, that's what I think you'd tackle. I don't think he's going to do that.
Why is nobody doing this? Why are people only saying when they're out of government, saying that they should do it?
Do you know what? I wish I had an answer. We've grilled people in Triggernometry. Like I remember, like the closest we came to getting an answer was two conversations. One with Rory Stewart and one with Suella Braverman. And Suella's answer was basically, well, the cabinet won't let me because we know that we have to leave the ECHR. But if we do, I think her words were something like, well, their argument would be we end up on the same list as like Belarus and, whatever. Whereas Rory's argument was like, well, you don't know what happens when you leave the ECHR and it might be really bad or something like that, right? There wasn't much of an argument there. Look, I think it's quite understandable because Britain was heavily involved in the ECHR in creating that mechanism for protecting people who were genuinely fleeing war and conflict and so on. But I also think, the important thing in any situation is to adapt to the realities on the ground. And the reality on the ground or in the channel, so to speak, is that lots and lots of people are coming who are not refugees. They're just not. They're economic migrants. And I don't know if I'm an economic migrant exactly, but I came to this country for a better life, basically. I came here for schooling, the university, and then I stayed, and etc. So I understand that, but I followed the rules. And millions of other people have followed the rules. And I think it's inevitable that anyone who's concerned about fairness, including lots of immigrants like me, don't want illegal immigration to be happening. So why is it happening? Well, I think fundamentally it's quite a difficult thing to do politically because you'd probably have to, I think you'd have to do a lot of things that are popular with the public but are very unpopular with the chattering classes.
Right. With
sections of the media, with the BBC, with others. And you saw, Starmer, I didn't think he'd gone too far at all. I thought he made a pretty moderate speech. My issue with it, as I said, was that it was inauthentic. But you saw people like comparing him to Enoch Powell.
Yeah. Well, it might be because it chimes with people. It doesn't chime. It's a bit odd for Keir to be saying those things.
Well, but that doesn't make it like Enoch Powell.
No.
It's not a rivers of blood speech at all. And I just think it's this very one-dimensional, stupid thing where it's like someone says anything about immigration, therefore they're a bad person. That's kind of the place we've got to, which I never understood. I always thought, like, all government policy is really like a slider. You go, a bit more of this, a bit less of that, right? That's all that it is. Why would there are times in the history of this country when you wanted more immigration, after the war, for example. And you push that slider into the more pro-immigration position, and you have lots of people come, rebuild the country, blah, blah, blah. There are times when you've had, under the Labour government, we had more people come to this country in 13 years than you had since the Battle of Hastings in 1066 and 1950. And then you have 14 years of a sequence of conservative governments that then do even worse than that. At that point, to suggest that maybe it's time to slow down doesn't seem to me like some kind of bigoted position. It just seems like a sensible position. It's like you can be like I always give this example. You can be incredibly pro ice cream without thinking that you need to have ice cream for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And if you refuse, you're a bad person. Like everything there's a right quantity of certain things.
Sure. So I've thought this before as well. You're not either pro or anti-immigration.
No, it's a superposition.
Everybody in the country is probably pro at least one person entering through immigration, and everybody is probably against the idea of 50 million people coming. And there's probably somewhere in the middle where we have to meet.
Right. It seems uncomplicated to me, but there are people who like to moralize about these things because they don't have an actual explanation. They don't have a rational argument for why we need 1 million people coming to this country net every year. And by the way, one thing people always forget, Andrew, and I think it's really important that we talk about it, is the net figures are not reflective of reality. The reality is that you have more than that, obviously, coming in, and you have lots of people leaving. And some of those people leaving are immigrants who are going back to their country. But some of those people are actually the best and the brightest of Britain who are leaving because taxes are so high, because business is so difficult to run, etc. So it's not like the number that you get is the actual reality. The reality is you're getting more immigration than that while losing a lot of your own people who are going to be the backbone of this country for years to come. That's kind of a problem.
Are you concerned that reform, reform it looks like might actually get in, which is incredible. Are you concerned that nobody seems to know what other things they want to do aside from immigration, or what happens once they actually get in?
I think anyone who doesn't know what they're going to do hasn't read their manifesto. If you read their manifesto, they are pretty clear. Whether those manifesto commitments are all possible at once is a different conversation. Nobody knows. I think you're not wrong to bring this up in the sense that if you look at, say, the Trump second administration now, like he wasn't talking about a lot of the things that he has since been saying and doing. I don't remember him on the campaign trail say, we're going to annex Canada, we're going to take Greenland, we're going to make the Panama Canal ours, etc. So I suppose some people might be concerned that, reform come in and start doing lots of things that they didn't promise. I don't imagine they're going to have a lot of time or energy for any of that stuff, because doing the things that are their core propositions are going to be so difficult to do. Particularly, I think, with the level of resistance within the civil service. Every single person we've had on Triggernometry who's been anywhere near power, when we've asked them, why did you find it so difficult to do things that you wanted to do? They've mostly basically said, like, we tried, but you have to use the machinery of the civil service, and they don't want any of the things that we believe in. So it's going to be very difficult, and I'd imagine they're going to have their hands full with that. And by the way, the economy is going to be fucked by the time that they get in, so that's going to be pretty challenging as well.
Christ, you need a sort of melee with the chainsaw.
Maybe. Latin American methods in Britain, I don't know whether they work just as well, but I certainly think you're gonna have to simultaneously, because see, the problem with immigration, Andrew, is that, like, illegal immigration, set that aside, that just needs to stop today, end, never again, etc. But in terms of mass immigration, the thing that I think is fair to say is that there are a lot of lies. We are being told that we need these immigrants to boost economic prosperity. That's bullshit. It's not true. Most of them are a net drain, including economically. Sadiq Khan has just openly, blatantly lied about it in the last week on LBC. Just lied, straight up, just a lie, just made up a thing that's not true, claiming that the average skilled immigrant brings in more than a British person. Just not true, just factually untrue. You can go and read, Matt Goodwin did a great breakdown of like how that's misrepresenting the reality, yeah? But at the same time, there has been this great trick going on, which is to say, well, the most important thing in our society is the economy. And everyone will tell you, it's the economy, right? The economy is the number one voting issue. It's the most important thing. Okay, what is the economy? The economy is GDP. What happens when you bring in someone who makes 12 grand a year? Well, you've just boosted your GDP by 12 grand. Has that made this country more prosperous? Well, if you look at GDP, technically it's made it GDP higher, but it's not made the country more prosperous, because what we really should be looking at is GDP per capita, per person. In other words, the total amount of money we make divided by the number of people in the country. And our country is not growing. Our GDP per capita is lower today than it was after the financial crisis in 2008.
There seems to be a per capita issue, doesn't it, on many subjects. It's the same in DEI. There are several subjects where the grooming gangs, where the legacy media doesn't seem to understand what per capita means.
Yeah, because a lot of them are not very bright. And the ones that do understand it are not very honest. They want to misrepresent this issue. But this isn't a media thing. I think this is mostly a politician thing, which is if you're a politician and you want to undo the scam, you then have to eat the consequences of that, which is you have to tell people, actually, you're poorer now than you were 20 years ago. And you might be poorer going forward because we're now going to get rid of some of that workforce that we've used to fill gaps at low wages. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So when and if reform come in, they're going to have a massive job on their hands. I don't think anyone should be like, I keep saying this to people, including within reform, like this is something you need to think very carefully about because like we always talk about the American dream and Britain not having a dream, right? Like if the British dream is to deport all the immigrants, right? What is do you think people's lives are going to be better the day after you've done that?
No.
So of course we have to end the abuse of the immigration system. We have to get numbers manageable. We have to make sure that people aren't coming and doing jobs that are being taken away from British people that otherwise might want to do them. But at the same time, you have to recognize that partly it's a demographic issue. We're just not having enough kids. And partly it's a fake economic growth issue. And no politician wants to admit that because they're the ones that then have to own the consequences of that. Yeah. Right. I don't know if did you ever watch The Wire?
No.
So The Wire is one of the best TV series ever. But one of the things they show is what happens when institutions have incentive structures set up in such a way that it misrepresents reality. So the police, for example, are incentivized to pretend that certain crimes are not as bad as they were, certain crimes didn't happen, etc. Teachers are incentivized to pretend that their students are doing better than, and so on and so forth. That's what's been happening on this issue. And that's why you have the levels of mass immigration that we've had, because the Treasury will say, well, we need these people to secure economic growth. Prime Minister, you don't want to go into the next election or, with the economy in recession. Well, the reality is the economy is in recession and has been for a long time, in my opinion, in the way that I would define it, right?
Right.
And the only way that that's been avoided, admitting that has been avoided, is by propping it up through mass low-skill, low-wage immigration.
And we really need to focus on things like growing families.
Well, what we need to focus on, first of all, is admitting that lie and then going, how do we boost GDP per capita? And that's why I think we're in a difficult position, because you currently have a government that is doing the exact opposite of what we need to actually get the country growing, which is, I mean, you know this, doing Heretics in your previous YouTube channel. As you grow, you employ more people, you pay them more, you invest more in your business, you create more stuff, right? You got to get off people's backs and let them build things instead of saying to them, we're going to tax you to the eyeballs and chase you out, because you probably have the same experience. Pretty much everyone I know who's successful, whose business is portable, is no longer in Britain. They've left.
It's just us.
Well, we're not that successful, clearly. But this is the point, right? Yeah. It's like, so when that happens, you're going to have to look at the way the entire economy is set up. And then, yes, of course, having kids is going to be part of that. But I don't know how much the government can do about that exactly. There's not a lot of evidence that you can really do a huge amount on that with the government. We'll find out, I guess.
Gosh, it's all a bit scary. How do you end practically illegal immigration with the boats and things?
Well, it's going to sound very complicated, but you turn the boats around. Because don't forget that they're not coming from Syria. They're coming from France.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't blame them for leaving France, but
yeah.
Do you see my point?
Yeah.
There's all this like, oh, this is really complicated. If you talk to the Australians, they're like, we fixed it.
Yeah, but they think men are women.
Yeah, but that's because it's been 12 years since they fixed it.
Right.
Tony Abbott and his government fixed it they were elected in 2013 and they basically fixed it, and no one's touched it since because it's fixed. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So Aussies are, but having been to Australia and spent some time there, this idea, it's not really quite true. Like Aussies are quite based as a society. They have a very woke elite, as most Anglosphere countries do, but actually the ordinary person is very based, and the reason for that is partly is they still have a lot of jobs for men of the type that men have been doing for a long time. Like people who work in mines in Australia make more money than lawyers in London. You can drive a truck, like one of those big, massive mine trucks, I don't know what they're called, and make like, I don't remember exactly, but it's like 80 grand pounds a year, 80,000 pounds a year, more than that. And if you work in the mine, twice that. So imagine a country where like, there's not a lot of wokeness going on in a mine. You know what I mean? So the Australians get a bad rep, but the country is sound. Some of the elites are a bit mental, as they are here.
What do you think about the term, and I'm thinking of a reaction, every action has a reaction, the term the woke right?
What do you mean, what do I think about it?
Well, because it's been controversial just in itself, isn't it? People are saying that it doesn't exist, it doesn't mean anything. People are saying it should be called the dissident right or all sorts of other things. Do you think woke right is accurate?
Yes.
And because a lot of people listening won't know about that as a notion.
Yeah, it's a term that actually, I think James Lindsay gives me the credit for coming up with it, and I give him the credit, but I think we kind of came up with it at the same time. I definitely think there's a woke right, and I think it's quite clear. Now, what do we mean by woke? Woke is, in my opinion, first and foremost, an obsession with group-based victimology. In other words, saying, we live in a society in which my group are victims, and it's very important that we identify around our group identity and our victimhood. And we are aware in a very special way, in a way that most people are not, just how oppressed we are. And now on a group basis, we've got to go and use authoritarian means usually to do something about that. That's what I always thought about as wokeness. There's definitely a woke right. And if you pay any attention to what's happening online, you can see it very clearly. And by the way, another reason I like to call it the woke right is, having coined the term, I now feel exactly the same way as I felt in 2018 when we started Triggernometry, where we were operating in an incredibly woke comedy industry. And lots of people would be like, oh, yeah, I agree with you, but I'm not going to say anything. Like, that's exactly what's happening. Not only that, I know someone who keeps making content online, quite famous and well known, who keeps making content about how the woke right doesn't exist and all of that, who told me in a private conversation that he actually thinks it exists.
That's mental, though.
No, it's not.
I think that's mental.
But that's exactly what happened with the woke. Do you not remember? There were all these people who pretended to have an opinion in public because they knew that they would be punished by the authoritarians on their side for denying a thing that everybody knew was going on.
But pretending to have an opinion if somebody asks you about it or whatever, or just putting up a black square or something is one thing, but making content particularly aimed at sort of, oh, the woke right isn't real, and then secretly telling you they think it is.
Well,
I think you should have a word with Francis about that. I think one example of it, I was just reading your brilliant book. It's really good. What's the name of it?
An Immigrant's Love Letter to the West.
I was loving it. I want everybody to read it.
So good that you forgot the name.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I knew that was a name, but I'm so scared of ever saying like a name of a thing in case
I know the feeling exactly. It's really worrying.
You tell me the name of your thing, because if I get it wrong, bloody hell.
Yeah.
But you mentioned, I didn't even know about this, but Bernie Sanders back in the day going around Russia sort of showing off how...
Soviet Union.
Yes, showing off how wonderful it was. And we've just seen Tucker Carlson do that. And you'd think one would be sort of the far left and one would be the far right.
Yeah.
Is that where there's a kind of woke right going on?
It's a great comparison. One I like even more is George Bernard Shaw, because he went over to the Soviet Union and went for a 3-hour interview with Stalin.
Right. Wow.
And he came away from that. I wrote, actually, when I came up in my own head, at least with the term woke right, there may well have been loads of other people who'd been using it, and I just unconsciously picked it up. But
probably me.
I wrote an article, I think it's one of the most read and viewed. So I make articles into videos called Tucker Carlson and the Woke Right after he went over to Russia.
I read that.
And I basically made the comparison that George Bernard Shaw went over to the Soviet Union because he had this idea of the Soviet Union and Russia in his head as this place that did not suffer from the ills of democracy. Right? They were able to do things. They were not watching their culture disintegrate. All of the You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And Tucker Carlson is exactly the same. So I think there are lots of pretty valid comparisons to be made. Now, the reason people get very upset about this phrase is A, it's 100% accurate, and B, it is kind of designed to insult them because it's saying, look at what you've become. You banged on for years about the importance of treating people as individuals and not canceling people and whatever. When I wrote that article about Tucker Carlson, I was instantly disinvited from a thing that I was going to that evening.
Wow.
So there is a lot of this happening on the right, and a lot of people are pretending it's not going on. Look, I'm not particularly driving some kind of agenda with it. There's, James Lindsay, for example, he's spends his days tweeting about it, and good for him. I think it's important to highlight it. I've said what I said in exactly the way that I said it in 2018 about the woke left. People are going to catch up over time because they're not going to be able to ignore that this thing's real. It's going to get worse.
You ever search for a news story and no matter where you click, it's all the same spin, and you still don't know what's actually true? That's because big tech buries results, pushes paid content, and tracks everything you do, just to feed you more of what they think you should see. That's why I use FreeSpoke. It's search reimagined. FreeSpoke puts you in control, showing you news from across the spectrum, clearly labeled for bias, no hidden censorship, no targeted ads, just real search results. As someone who believes in free speech on Heretics, viewpoint diversity, and hearing all sides of a story, I genuinely love what FreeSpoke is doing. It's the first search engine built to support independent voices with new media podcast clips, video commentary, and articles all in one place. So do what I did. Download the free FreeSpoke app and subscribe today. Head to my link, freespoke.com/gold, and use promo code GOLD25 to get 25% off FreeSpoke Premium and take back control of your search.
I suppose, one argument that could be against it, and I like using woke right, I think for the same reason, because it annoys people and it shows them the hypocrisy because they were having it. I do like that. But I suppose if tribal authoritarianism or tribal or group victimhood were a band, and it was releasing lots of different albums, I feel like maybe you could say woke was one iteration of that. But they
behave in exactly the same ways.
But so have every kind of tribal group in history. The Nazis did that, the Stasi did it, the Bolsheviks. It was all sort of a group grievance. So maybe it's just woke was that particular album, Stasi was another album, and so on.
I see what you're saying. I don't think there's any contradiction between what you're saying and what I'm saying.
No. I think it still can be used, but I can see why some people will go, well, okay, woke was one of it. Woke was a particular blue-haired kind.
If you think of woke in that way, I can see why it doesn't make sense. But I explained to you what I think of woke as, and I think therefore the comparison is valid.
What do you think about, this is something that's been not necessarily bothering me, but intriguing me. I think you and I and the Andrew Doyles of this world who might see ourselves maybe as liberals or just broadly, I don't even know what, but just individuals who are trying to navigate this world, sort of aligned ourselves in this fight against wokeness with a contingent of maybe, what would you call them, religious fundamentalists maybe. Is there now, just like how the sort of the woke left has sort of started to split, are we about to maybe split in the coming years?
I have never aligned myself with anyone in that sense. I've always the one thing I've kept telling people consistently through the ages: I am not your ally, and I've been telling them that because I knew this moment was coming, and this moment was coming not just with this group of people that you're talking about. It was also coming with gender critical feminists, right? Like gender critical feminists were fighting a very important fight about the trans issue. You've covered it extensively, right, on this channel.
Yeah.
It was an important. Sorry, I'm just teasing you, mate. But
Yeah.
as have we. Like,
well, you know what though? I think you guys did earlier on, didn't you?
Yeah.
And then I did, and I think both of us probably came to that same feeling of like, oh gosh, you know what? I think I've said everything
and understood everything. Yeah. Like for us, it was a genuine attempt to understand what was going on. I think for you as well.
Yeah.
And once you get to that point, it's like you're okay. Well, now we know what we think about it, right? But anyway, my point is, I always made it clear to them that I am not a feminist of the type that they are. I'm like, women, equal opportunities, equal rights, whatever. Is that realistically likely to happen in our society? Probably not, because women are mothers. But I don't hate men, and I don't like people who hate men. And among gender critical feminists, there are many people who do hate men. That's just a fact, right? Yeah. So I always kept reminding them, I'm not on your team. I'm also not on the ethno-nationalist team or the religious team. That said, I really don't have any problem with religious people in general. I actually, the more older I get, the more I think religion is valuable. And I certainly don't turn my nose up at people. Fundamentalists of every kind I dislike. And if they're religious, they tend to be a little bit more confident about their fundamentalism. That said, James Orr said something on our podcast that I've been thinking about in relation to the woke right. He said, if you fear the religious right, just wait until you meet the post-religious right. And I think that's kind of what you're seeing in some ways. But yeah, so I understand your point entirely, which is it has felt to many people that we have been in alliance with some people and that alliance is now splitting. My attitude in trigonometry in terms of my own stuff that I say has always been the same. It's that great quote from, I think it's a British Foreign Secretary, I think. Lord Palmer, is it?
Yeah.
Who said, we have no permanent alliances. We have only permanent interests. And to them, it is to them that we owe allegiance. My interest is in trying to understand the world, trying to speak the truth as best I can, try and make as few mistakes as possible, try and be wrong as rarely as possible, even though I will be wrong a lot. And so I never signed up to be like part of like team right wing. So when I have been saying for the last 6 years or however long it's been, 7 years, that I'm not right wing, I was saying it to both sides. I was saying it to the left, who wanted to use the term right wing to accuse me of being a bad person, and therefore they could dismiss everything I was saying and not have to listen to. I was saying, no, I'm not right wing, right? Like, pay attention to what I'm actually telling you. And I was also saying it to the people on the right, like, I will disappoint you at some point because I don't agree with you on everything and I don't plan to.
Well, that disappointing of them is the splintering I'm talking about.
Yeah,
even,
but that's,
even though you never committed to it.
Yeah, but that's their problem. I told them. Yeah, I told them up front.
Well, I'm just asking if it's happening.
I think it's happening with some people, but my experience is, we get lost in these like extreme ends of the conversation online where like there's this group over here that don't like and there's this group over here. And actually, I find that the majority of our audience, those of them that are center right, are perfectly content with the fact that Francis and I are more to the center than them. And those of them that are center left are content that we're more to the center than them as well. And that's one of the things that I think the internet is one of the joys of the internet is it allows people, it's also one of the problems with the internet, but it's also one of the joys. It allows people to really find people who match the way they see the world in some way. And the way we see the world is we really try to have conversations with different types of people who have different views. And we wanted to build an audience of people who are interested in that. If you want the same culture war slop that there are other people who will provide it for you, that's out there. And I call it slop because it's a term I'm seeing a lot right now in the kind of social discussions on Twitter and whatever, because that is what's happening. But if that's the kind of content you want, that's great. It's just not what I'm interested in making. And if that's not for you, like, I don't know how you feel about it, but for me, I've always thought about, like, look, man, life is kind of short. And I don't want to spend my life making things that I don't think are good things and I don't believe in order to what? To make more money, to get a bigger audience, to have a higher status. Those are not good trade-offs for me, especially now that Triggernometry has got, reasonable size and it kind of sustains itself. Like we will have someone on the left on one week and on the right the next, and a comedian who takes the piss out of us the next, and it works for us. So I'm really like, I really couldn't give a shit about anyone splintering. Like, okay, I don't care.
I think it's a beautiful position to be in because you've built this over some years. You've put so much into it, and people respect Triggernometry so much. So it is something. I think you hit on it. Now that it is of that size, it's very difficult.
We've always been like that, though.
Yeah,
we've always had that attitude, but it was a lot harder. Admittedly.
That's the thing.
Yeah,
it's really hard at the beginning.
Yeah, but it gets easier over time if you really do pursue that path. If you really keep telling people, like, we're going to have different conversations. Like we just had Deborah Francis White, who's the guilty feminist, who people loved watching because she was a bit mental. And then the next week we interviewed Phillips.
Yeah.
And people were the same people who'd celebrated us having Deborah Francis White on and allowing her to basically destroy all her own credibility and arguments by herself, effectively, were then really upset with us for hosting someone else whose views they dislike just as much, right? And I have like really dear friends who are like, I wish you hadn't had this person on, or I wish you hadn't had that person on, or I don't agree with this thing you said about Islam, or I don't agree with this thing you said about the woke right, or I don't agree with this thing that you said about Rishi Sunak. But we're still friends, and we still are able to be very close and have, really great relationships. That's the kind of people I want to be surrounded by. And that's the kind of people I want watching our channel.
Are there people who might be very interesting to have on and would get a lot of views who you would maybe sidestep?
Loads of people. And we have done. Loads of people.
And for what reason?
That we don't think it would be a valuable conversation. We don't want to be amplifying what they're saying in some way. Now, we do have a lot of people who we don't agree with, but people always ask about this stuff, and it's like, I don't have an algorithm to give you of like, how do Konstantin and Francis pick out the guests? There are certain people we have not had on and we would not have on. And I don't know that I can explain to you exactly why, in a way that when you say to me, yeah, but what about this other person that you have had on? I can be like, well, that's because this. It's like, it's kind of the smell test in some ways,
Yeah. No, I have a similar thing. And people, you're right, they can point out my hypocrisy because I will have had somebody who's quite similar and I go, oh, I don't really want that one now. Or I'm in a different mood that particular day and I don't want that anymore. Tell me about how the USSR, and this touched on what we were talking before, was a sort of woke utopia. It sounds actually very good in many respects.
Well, the ideas behind it sound very good. The idea is, but it's the same idea. The thing that I think is important to say, and I've been thinking about this a lot, is ultimately the divide between these two wings of society. I think a lot of it is just to do with your psychotype, like your personal psychology, your temperament, effectively. If your attitude towards the world is one of agency, then you probably want a world in which you have opportunity to succeed and fail on your own merit. And if your attitude to the world is that the world is cruel and harsh and you probably can't do well by yourself, then what you want is to be looked after by society or community or the government or whatever. And and so this recurrent idea in human nature, which is about, let's make sure that we redistribute as much as possible and make everyone as equal as possible. It's a recurring theme in human nature because there are a lot of people to whom that's very appealing for psychological reasons. And the Soviet Union was based on the idea, from each according to his ability to each according to his need. Let's take from the people who bake the pie and make sure everyone has a good share of the pie. And in some ways, beyond that, the Soviet Union was quite progressive when it came to women's rights.
Yeah.
By modern understanding of that concept. It had universal healthcare. It had universal and free education. It had, universal childcare. All these great
employment.
Yeah, guaranteed employment.
Yeah.
No unemployment whatsoever. The price you paid for that was the health service was terrible. The economy was stagnant because you had all the wrong people in all the wrong positions, making all the wrong decisions. Education was genuinely very good, to be fair.
Different ethnicities living together.
Yeah. Well, when you have a very, 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 very strong authoritarian state that can say, oh, you guys are living in this area, okay, we'll move you to Siberia. Or you guys are living here, we'll move you over there. When you have a very strong state that can basically brutalize its citizens, then yes, you can achieve this friendship of the peoples, as it was called. But it was achieved. It was achieved. But those were the means by which it was achieved. So there were lots of things in theory that worked. And this is why I'm so careful about reminding people of not falling for the same traps, because in my view, it takes that level of authoritarianism to achieve many of those outcomes. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And most people who want equality for all men and all of this other great stuff, they don't think about that. They just go, well, wouldn't it be nice if everybody was equal? Yeah, it would be, but they're not.
When I was living in Germany, there was a lot of what they call Ostalgie, which is a nostalgia for the East. Is that how some Russians and Soviet or people who were in the Soviet areas feel now?
There's definitely a lot of that. Yeah, definitely.
It's an amazing thing to think of, and I found myself inadvertently when I first arrived in Berlin offending a lot of people because by assuming they would look back not so fondly. You had your grandpa was a white slave. Tell me about that.
Well, he was taken by the Germans into Nazi Germany during the war to be a slave laborer on a farm, I think. And the reason I bring it up in the book, as you know, is that I talk about slavery more broadly. And I just think on that issue, I really do think the world's gone completely crazy. Because the British everywhere in the world throughout history, every great empire, every great civilization practiced slavery and considered it either normal or good, or in some cases, a kind of unpleasant reality that we all have to deal with, like bad weather or whatever. You know, well, look, it's raining, like that's not nice, but that's, you know, that's what it is. And then along came the British Empire, which practiced slavery to the best of its ability, like all other empires before it, and then ended it. Not only within its own borders, but actually forced other countries to end it. To the point where there are countries in the Middle East that didn't give up slavery until the middle of the 20th century, and only under pressure from the Brits, right? So this is the example I give in Immigrant's Love Letter to the West. Let's say that we get to a point where, you know, eating animals is considered as bad as slavery is considered now. Probably will get there eventually, right? If the vegans have their way.
Do you remember when you were sat next to me and they put, I really didn't want them to, but they put a big thing saying vegetarian on my plate.
Yeah. Did I rinse you for that?
Oh, yeah. And I think Francis also, it was another time, called me a nonce.
Did he?
Yeah.
For not killing animals?
Yeah.
That sounds like a Francis thing to call you. But anyway, so let's say we get to a point where, you know, nonces like you
yes.
Have won.
That'd be in the trailer.
Yeah. Then would we say that the first country to end the practice of killing and eating animals should feel endlessly guilty about having once eaten animals? Or would we say that this was the most progressive society in human history?
Or the latter.
Right. So what's going on?
What is going on?
I don't know. I think British people seem to really like feeling guilty about stuff.
But they don't. This is it, because I wonder about this guilt, and I know that Gad Saad calls it suicidal empathy, and my gut feeling is we're not really talking about empathy or guilt. I think we're talking about domination. I don't think if you really got inside, these people think they feel guilty. Maybe I'm going in too far here, but I don't think they're sitting around really feeling guilty. They're feeling tribal. They're feeling like I'm one of these people who has a go at my own culture because it's fashionable and it lifts me up. I don't. How is that empathy? Empathy is being able to understand both sides, even the unfashionable one.
I think there's definitely a lot of that going on, but I think the people with that idea of dominating others are also preying on other people who don't want to. Like what I've just said is factually correct. It's logical, and most importantly, it's true. Right? Have you ever heard anyone other than me make that argument? It's obvious. So you don't have to be a genius to make the point that I just made. You really don't, because I'm not a genius. So why is it that no one else has made that argument? Well, we know why that is. Most people are afraid. They're terrified of saying the thing that I just said, right? So that's not because we have, and that's because they fear the domination, but they also feel guilty. They've been indoctrinated into feeling guilty about it, which is why the woke left inevitably produces the woke right. Because if you tell white people that they're all evil, then eventually you're going to create people who are saying, well, not only are we not evil, we're actually great. Let's make whiteness great again, right? And that's where you get the backlash and the identity politics of the majority. Whereas my view is I just don't think identity politics is healthy, and we should have stayed well away from the crazies on the left And we have to stay well away from the crazy ideas on the right about, people uniting around their ethnic identity within multi-ethnic societies is always going to end very badly for everybody. It's just not a healthy thing to do. I think people. I went to the Slavery Museum in Liverpool. Great museum. Great museum. It covers the history of the slaves and everything really well, the brutalities they suffered, all the terrible things that people really should be educated on. Nowhere in that museum does it say who captured the slaves. Nowhere in that museum does it say who sold the slaves. Nowhere in that museum does it say that white Europeans wouldn't even get off the boats when they went to Africa because they were so terrified of the local diseases. And those slaves were being delivered to them by other Africans who had been capturing them long before the Europeans ever turned up. Nowhere in that museum does it contextualize slavery in the way that I just did by reminding people that in every great empire in human history, slavery was practiced. At the same time that the Europeans were taking slaves out of Africa, the Arabs were doing it too. And that slave trade was just as bad, in many ways far worse. Many of the men would be castrated, the women taken as sex slaves.
Oh God!
Right, the Barbary pirates would be raiding the coast of Europe. Were raiding the coast of Europe to the point where Americans had to get involved in a war against them. Right, so. People they're not just uneducated about this issue, they've been deliberately miseducated about this issue because there is a kind of collective guilt that you're supposed to feel about it. And I don't think I think it's really important that people recognize the terrible things that human beings are capable of. And that this country, like other countries, has a history of doing terrible things. But I also don't think that we should beat ourselves up endlessly and present ourselves in a lopsided way on that issue. The truth about Britain's history of slavery is that it engaged in slavery in a terrible way, like everybody else, and then it brought an end to it. And I think in addition to recognizing the evils of the past, we also should recognize the achievements of the past. It seems a pretty sensible position to me.
Well, I think most people do think that, but they don't seem to be able to speak about it. Are you getting that feeling? Most ordinary people you walk around and meet, they understand that.
I don't think so.
Well, I know what you're saying. I mean, I don't know if people have put it the way you put it about slavery, but I think a lot of people are. A lot of people are aware that it wasn't just white people who kept slaves.
My impression of talking to people is people, generally speaking, do not know much about this. And part of the reason is it's one of those things that you don't necessarily want to look into. Yeah. Because what happens if you actually find out the reality? What do you then do with that information? So
was it a great-grandfather or grandfather?
That was my grandfather.
That was your grandfather. And on the other side, there was also what seems like slavery.
Well, my grandmother on my dad's side, she's my grandfather's second wife, but she's my grandmother for all intents and purposes. She was born in a gulag, in a forced labor camp for political prisoners. So you have the wrong opinion, or you're the wrong ethnicity, or you're from the wrong country, or you have the wrong opinions about stuff. You go to this camp for 10 years and you have to do slave labor, basically. Yeah.
And so that will have informed you in a way. I mean, most people will not, in the UK, won't even begin to understand the kind of childhood you had. There was a point in your book that was about spilling milk. That was one of your first memories. Do you remember actually feeling how important that was? No.
I was a toddler, but my mum tells a story of how terrified she was when when I was born. My mum had been 18 for 4 days, and my dad was 20. They were very poor students at Moscow University, and they had very little money. So they in the Soviet Union they had these pyramid. I said triangular, but pyramid milk cartons. And I was walking around, so I'd opened this tiny little Soviet fridge, and I got one of these, and I was glugging it. And she watched me pour the milk down myself, and she was like, "Oh, we were going to use that milk to make porridge today or something," And she was terrified because she couldn't really afford anything else. So I grew up in a lot of but see, it was poverty, but it was very standard in the Soviet Union. It was pretty normal, people living like that.
But compared to a lot of people here, I mean, how did that sort of growing up in that kind of quite a difficult childhood, I'd imagine, because you were then sent away from your parents, right? How did that form the Konstantin Kisin of today?
Well, I had to, because my parents sent me to boarding school when they did have some money for a very short period of time. I kind of ended up in a sink or swim situation. So I had to fend for myself. I think I became very independent minded. And I think I had to really, work out how to survive in that environment, which wasn't easy. I came over, I didn't speak any English. And it took me a little while to adjust. Yeah.
How were the other kids with you?
In the first year or so, when I didn't speak the language and didn't really understand what was going on, a lot of the kids were dicks. But what I found, and this was something that, I would say, if I did send my children to school, I definitely would still send them to, I wouldn't send them to boarding school, I don't think, but I'd send them to public school. And that's because what I got very quickly was that within that society, kind of closed society in a way, right, that a boarding school is, the way to overcome any challenges or people being mean to you or whatever was through being successful in some way. So the moment I started playing sports, it turned out I was actually pretty good. I picked rugby up very quickly because I was the same size at 13 that I am now. So I used to play second row, believe it or not.
That surprises me.
Yeah.
You were good at rugby?
I wasn't like amazing at rugby because I didn't know what a rugby ball was. I think the first time I broke through the defense and got under the post, I threw the ball down like American football style. And of course I didn't score a try. But I was just big. And I was like, I liked sports. I was pretty good.
Big.
I was this size at 13.
Oh, you're kidding?
Yeah.
So you were like the big guy?
I basically did. Yeah, that's why I was second row.
What happened?
I didn't grow since then, Andrew.
Wow.
Mate, this is...
I'm just amazed. No, I
You wouldn't do that to a disabled person, would you? It was like, well, you can't walk. What happened?
I would. I think I could get away with that.
This is like height shaming. But anyway, so
I hated being tall, by the way. I was 6'3" when I was 14.
Really? You
Yeah.
hated being tall?
Well, I was...
Because everyone was like picking on you or looking at you or what?
Lanky, lanky bastard and all that, and very skinny, so I was lanky and
I think the moral of the story is kids are cunts.
Yeah.
I think that's fair, right?
Yeah. But if you play rugby, you might...
So what happened is I started playing rugby, then I started playing, hockey was really, basketball and hockey. Those were the sport. And by the time I'd got to like the last few years of school, I was the goalkeeper of the first team for hockey. I was good at economics. I was good at like certain things. So what I found was effectively what school taught me was if you try enough things, you will probably find out that you're good at some of them. I was on the debating team for my house that we won the whole competition in that thing. There'll probably be things that you're good at. And if you do those things well, you'll be rewarded for it. And it was a hard lesson because when you're not good at any things, you don't get treated very well. But what I found very quickly is as you find yourself and find out what you're good at, your status in that mini society rises, people treat you differently. And that's been my experience throughout the rest of my life too. So it's a very useful lesson, although quite unpleasant to start with.
I think Will Storr, who you've interviewed as well,
yeah.
he would say there are two other ways to do this, but they would both be quite toxic, and one would be through virtue, and one would be through dominance. If you're not successful, those are two other options open to you.
Yeah.
But they're quite toxic, and they only work, and we see that, I think, on a bigger scale. Wokeness would be the virtue. Perhaps some aspects of the right might be dominance.
Well, you can have real virtue too. Like you could be someone who genuinely like contributes meaningfully to people around you. But but if you think about it, in my particular case, if you don't speak the language and you don't understand the culture, a lot of the ways that you might do that, like for example, dominance can be verbal. Like you can be very funny and just be cutting and undercut, but only if you speak the language very well and you understand the culture. I didn't have that. Even though I was bigger than most kids, I wasn't particularly like into beating them up. It wasn't my thing. So I didn't have that dominance route available. So I think found the right way for me. And it served me well. But everyone who goes through their life and has some kind of like difficult experiences that shape them into who they are in a positive way, but probably also leave some trauma behind that you have to unpack over time. And that certainly was like that for me, for sure.
Is that what led to you becoming a comedian?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. No, no. But what it did lead me to is to having a very hard shell around me and like nothing can hurt me type of thing. But in reality is everyone can be hurt. So it's more of a facade than a reality.
Yeah.
And I only realized that probably like a year ago and had to kind of like unpack that.
I'm happy you say that because I've got an urge with you to sort of, I want to pick at things and get to the soft Konstantin.
The underbelly.
Yeah, well, we've had conversations before where we've disagreed about death, right? And
Have we?
Yeah. Well, do you remember we spoke about it with my wife actually? Because I remember saying to you that I worry about it at sort of 3 a.m. and you were like, well, there's no point worrying about it. Everything's fine. And I wonder what's actually.
Oh, you see. Oh, I see what you're saying. No, that's probably a misunderstanding from that. That's definitely not an area where you're going to get to any underbelly. It's more because when I was in my 20s, I realized that not everything I couldn't do everything that I wanted. There were certain things I wanted to be able to do that I couldn't do. Like at school, I was on the debating team, but by the time I got to my mid-20s, I had like a fear of public speaking.
Wow.
I don't know what happened. Maybe I just hadn't done it for a few years, or maybe the context had changed or something. So I was like, I want to get good at that, right? And there were other things in my relationship that I wanted to be better at, and others. So I did a lot of personal development, psychology courses, etc. And in the process of that, I just kind of, one of the things that was very useful in that journey was getting the reality that you're going to die. It's something I've talked in my speeches at ARC, for example, about. I don't know if you noticed, but both my ARC speeches are something that I mentioned. It's not like I'm covering up some great fear on that. I actually just genuinely accepted my mortality. It's a lot, and I was great and delighted with that for a while until my son was born. And then you go, oh, okay, fear of your own death is fuck all. Like when you have kids, that's when real fears start, right? But in terms of my own mortality, especially if I can get my children to adulthood or my son to adulthood and set him up in the right way, I've lived a good life. I've said what I believe. I've tried to treat people as well as I've been able to. I've failed many, many times in many different ways, but I've always made amends with people if I have. I've always said sorry to people if I've wronged them somehow, or if I've behaved in a way that I don't think is right, or at least I've tried. I've given everything I've done in my life. I've tried to do my best, and like, what else is there? What is there to fear? It's coming anyway, whether you're afraid of it or not.
Well, if you told me there's a train and it's coming anyway and it's going to hit you, it's coming anyway, whether you fear it or not.
But it is coming.
Yeah, I'd be scared of that.
But the train is coming.
It scares the shit out of me.
Well, that's probably, so if you're going to do psychoanalysis here, what I would say is you probably haven't done the things you need to do to not be scared of the fact that you're going to die.
Solve death.
No. You're never going to solve death. You are going to die.
I know. People do try though, don't they?
To what? Solve death?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's because they're afraid.
I think there's a very tiny sort of back of my head thing that thinks maybe they will solve it by the time I'm a certain age.
Yeah, everyone throughout history has thought that.
I know.
But anyway, stick with this, right? So you are going to die, and that train is coming. So what is it that you fear that you won't have the chance to do before that happens?
I don't think it's that necessarily.
Okay, so what is it?
I think it's I love living. I love breathing.
Sure.
Touching, being, talking. I can't get enough of it.
But it is going to end.
Yeah, and that's terrifying. I love it.
It's interesting. I've never thought about it like that. But why would you be terrified of something that's inevitable?
Well, there's two sides.
Yeah, I can see the counter argument. Like, you're going to be tortured for the next 3 weeks. Why are you terrified of something that's inevitable? Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just, okay, this is over. Yeah.
Well, it will happen to us, and maybe you sooner than me, because you're a bit older than me, aren't you?
Thanks, mate.
Well, do you do sort of smoke and things? Do you go paragliding and things like that?
Not really.
Because that would annoy me if like a friend of mine was doing all that and then I still died first. Although I wouldn't be able to, unless I was dying slowly and I was but he's still paragliding. How's he getting away with it? You'll
know it when you hit 40. After 40, I think like that's when you start to see the bifurcation very quickly. So there are a lot of people who haven't really looked after themselves until they get to 40 that kind of get away with it. But once you get to 40, like that ends pretty sharp.
Okay. You're pretty trim, you know.
Yeah, but I need to do better on my health, definitely.
Where do the Gary Linekers and the James O'Briens of this world get this conviction that they are right? I mean, James O'Brien wrote the book, you know, How to Be Right. Where do they get this?
Have you read it?
No. Have you?
No.
Well, he's right. There's no point, was there?
Well, maybe he is right. I don't know. Maybe we should read it and find out. I don't know. You'd have to ask them. I think, look, I'm just as convinced as they are about certain things that I believe. I think in their case, it's a kind of moral conviction, I suppose. But I don't think there's anything particularly abnormal about people being confident about their beliefs. I just happen to disagree with some of their beliefs.
Yeah. I've been finding. Where do you stand on the sort of Gary Lineker issue with the BBC? Have you given much thought to that?
The fact that he's leaving.
And that he was told off for being political, despite being sort of a leading.
Well, he's been doing that for a long time and getting away with it and daring them, I think, to push back against it. I don't think BBC presenters should be political in that way. But it's interesting because it's one of the fascinating things about the BBC, whereby you've had this great institution, which is what the BBC is, a great institution that. There was the gold standard of journalism for a very long time. And then at some point that must have changed. And I know because I've spoken to people who left around the time that it did change. And they said it was no longer about journalism. It now became ideology, right? But then the pretense of it being the gold standard of journalism remained. And so you had for some time these people like Andrew Marr, like Emily Maitlis and others who were working at the BBC and being these independent, neutral journalists. And then they all left the BBC and started their own podcasts. And now you know what they really think. And you go, these people aren't independent at all. And there's no possible way that Emily Maitlis, who can't wrap her head around people wanting to lower migration and has to call everyone racist when they do, there is no possible way that woman is capable of journalistic independence. That's physically not possible.
Did you see her say that to Rupert Lowe?
Yeah. And it's just this like emotional scolding that it's like it looks like, if you look at her face, it looks like she's talking to a dog turd.
Yeah.
At best, but like a dog turd that's misbehaved, right? That's what it looks like. And that is not a person that is capable of being journalistically independent. It's not possible. When you experience that level of negative emotion towards somebody, you cannot possibly have a real conversation with them. It's just physically not possible. So I think we've kind of been gaslit for a while about this stuff. Andrew Neil, for example, I think he's clearly on the center right, obviously, but I think he was able to keep that under wraps a little better. Jeremy Paxman, I don't know what his politics are. Fiona Bruce, I've met her a number of times. She's absolutely incredibly friendly and polite, super professional. And I don't know if she's a woke lefty or she's far right. I genuinely don't know. Like, she's able to keep her politics completely out of the conversations that she hosts. And she's challenged me on stuff when I've been on Question Time, and she's also challenged other people when they've said things that she just seems to me like really good, very good at her job. And David Dimbleby was the same, I think. So there are some people who manage it, but there are many people who fail to manage it. And because of that, and that's the presenters, right? Then you go into the BBC and you meet the production staff. And you go, okay, you've got a nose piercing and blue hair. I don't know what your politics are, but I can fucking guess, right? And so I think, I don't even remember why I started this rant, but
just that I wonder if it's even possible to have a politically neutral, a huge organization that employs thousands of people that could ever make it. Because I suppose the kind of person that's ideological, at least in these days, tends to be sort of left leaning, and those are the people who want to.
I don't know. There's quite a lot of ideological people on the right at this point as well.
That might be true.
I just think there's probably a very small number of people who are capable of being high-level presenters who could be recruited to front shows on the BBC who would be capable of doing it neutrally. Likewise, coming back to how we started this conversation, I'm pretty sure it would be possible to find someone to host Match of the Day who doesn't opine about politics.
Yeah.
I don't think that's reaching for the unattainable.
Yeah. Well, he says, Gary Lineker, that it's the worst thing he's ever seen. And I suppose it's that thing, if he feels like there really is some sort of Holocaust going on and he didn't speak out,
then he should do what he's done, which is resign from an organization that requires political impartiality and speak his mind.
When the Soviet Union fell, ethnic tensions rose again. Are you concerned that that's about to, even more so, happen here in the UK with ethnic tensions? Is there any way for us all to live together?
There is, and this brings us to Britishness versus ethnic identity or national identity even. Yeah. I think that, look, there are people you mentioned, like on the ethno-nationalist right, who will say, the only way to get everyone to live together is for them all to be of the same ethnic background and basically get rid of the foreigners and everything will be wonderful. Don't know if that's true, but more importantly, I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's possible. You're not going to get rid of the however many millions of people in this country from different backgrounds, ethnically, racially, culturally, etc. So we have to start where we are. We are living in a multi-ethnic society. Are there examples in history of multi-ethnic societies where people coexist peacefully? Yes. Almost every empire in history is that kind of society. How is it done? It's done by emphasizing the fact that we are all participants in a collective group identity that goes above and beyond our individual identity, like ethnicity, sex, race, sexuality, etc. We had actually, he's become an MP now for the Lib Dems, but we had a guy called Mike Martin who wrote a book called Why We Fight. He fought in Afghanistan for the British Army, with the British Army. He was in Afghanistan with the British Army. And he talked about the fact that oxytocin, which is the hormone that binds us to other people, is also the hormones that makes us wary of outsiders. In other words, if we accept that human beings are tribal, you cannot ever overcome tribalism. The only question is, at what level do you set the tribe? And my sense is that the nation state, or the empire state, if you like, is the right unit at which you... So I think it's fine that we hate the French. I don't have a problem with us hating the French and the Germans and the Americans and the whoever's. I think in the modern world, the way that it is designed, I think that level, the way that it is now, is the best form of tribalism that's available, right? Until the aliens arrive, and then we can all be human and against the aliens, right? I don't think within our small set of islands, the idea that we should set the level of tribalism at white people or brown people or black people or LGBTQ or men versus women. I don't think that's a recipe for a healthy society. What that means is we have to be very clear that there's a British identity. We have to be a lot more cognizant of encouraging people to buy into that. We have to be incredibly unashamed about distinguishing between people who are British and who are not British. It's one of the reasons that I think it's very, very important that we make, in law and in practice, very strong distinctions between people who are citizens and people who are not. So, for example, if you are not a British citizen, I don't think you should be... There will always be some example of people who go, well, what about this particular type of benefit or whatever? But broadly speaking, I think your entitlement to benefits in this country, unless you're a citizen of this country, should be as close to zero as we can manage it. Right? If you have come here illegally, you should have literally no rights other than like the basic rights of like, we can't torture you, we can't, etc. But if you're not a citizen of this country, you should not be entitled to the privileges that citizenship should bring. So I think that's part of it. And the other part of it, and you see this happening now in Scandinavian countries, they're becoming quite muscular about saying to people who come from other places, integrate or leave. I think that's really important.
Yeah, it's been so strange to see how fast that's happening in sort of Sweden. What is it that we are as a British? What is it? What is that unifying feature?
I have no idea. I keep asking people, and everyone goes, "Oh, I don't know. I don't think it's for me to define it. I don't think it's for me to define it. I think it's what I've done since I've come to this country as a boy is attempted to work out sort of broadly what those things are, and to attempt to integrate into that as best I can. That does not mean that I can write it down on a piece of paper. Mm-hmm. But I imagine as a collective, as a country, we actually might be able to come up with some things based on our history and our past and the wisdom of our ancestors and so on that might be able to give some shape to that. And then we should be incredibly thorough about making sure that everyone in this country is encouraged to buy into that and to participate in that. And if there are people who come from other countries that don't want to buy into that and want to live in a different way, they're very welcome to do so, just not in this country.
Unfortunately, as you know, look, we're all concerned. A lot of people are concerned about Islam. I think a lot of people are now very concerned. People who even 5 or 10 years ago would have said, "Oh no, that's racist" or whatever. Very concerned now, and historically, it doesn't sort of just stop, does it? It's sort of, if we look at Iran, Lebanon, Afghanistan, what happened there? Are you concerned that's going to happen here?
But in none of those countries did it happen by a few million people coming in through immigration, right?
Well,
as far as I know,
perhaps not. No,
no. So it's a different.
The main thing is about having enough numbers, and they were sort of promulgated or pushed up by the left in those countries.
You have to flesh the argument about what's this fear that you're talking about.
In Lebanon and Afghanistan and Iran, they had quite secular societies. They were flawed societies, of course, because it was sort of royal family kind of aspect. But the left in those countries formed an alliance with radical Islam and then took over, then the left were killed. My concern here is you don't need a huge majority of people from a culture that has a much fiercer tradition than ours and feels stronger about their own culture than we do for them to take over. They don't need a majority for that.
Yeah.
And they can win democratically.
Well, I think they're a very, very long way away from winning democratically. I think it's very important to distinguish between a number of things. I wrote an article about this on my Substack. I don't know if you saw it, about Uzbekistan and Islam. So you can have the philosophical and religious arguments. They're perfectly legitimate arguments. I'm not that interested in them because we're talking at the level of politics here, right? How do you solve a problem is kind of what you're asking me, right? Or do you worry about this issue?
Sure.
So my sense is I've traveled to various Muslim countries in the former Soviet Union and elsewhere. And Muslim countries and Singapore, which is a non-Muslim country, are much better at dealing with the problem of radical Islam than we are.
Yeah.
And the reason is they don't bullshit themselves about radical Islam because they don't have political correctness that has to pretend that Islamists are these brilliant, peace-loving people, because they understand that these are the extremists within their own society. In the same way that, we were talking about it before we started, Hasidic Jews are kind of on the extreme end of Judaism. And there are certainly, I can tell you from personal experience, some Christians who are on the extreme ends of that religion. I'm not saying they're exactly equivalent. I'm not saying Christians are doing suicide bombings left, right, and center, or the Hasidic or whatever. But my point is, Muslim countries generally tend to be able to deal with this problem better, mostly, because they understand these people are extremists and they do what we should be doing with extremists, which is cracking down on them as hard as possible. Right? Now, people will say, well, that's, prejudice against the Muslim community. Or no. I think we should take the Muslim community at their word. Every time there's a terrorist attack that's committed by an Islamist, we are told that most Muslims are peace-loving people who want to be British and integrated and peaceful as much as we do. Okay, I believe that. And we're told that around the world, and this is factually correct, the biggest victims of Islamist extremism are Muslims. That's a fact, because what we've done is we've imported the civil war that's raging within the Islamic world into Britain, between the people who want a caliphate and the people who are actually quite happy with nation states. So we should be very firmly on the side of the moderate Muslims who want to be part of Britain and who do not want to impose their religious worldview on this society. Look, they're more socially conservative than you and I. Given the craziness of the woke left, I don't think people who love family and want to have large families and, think that, having kids out of wedlock, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing in and of itself. I know I'm kind of making a separate point here. But here's what I'm trying to say. If we take the Muslim community at their word, they should be at the very forefront of joining with us in cracking down on Islamist extremism.
Yes, except as Yasmin Mohammed will tell you, or that she believes that an atheist Muslim is a dead Muslim. Or in other words, by speaking out. I mean, I think it's more dangerous for Muslims to speak out.
How can you be an atheist Muslim? Sorry, if I'm being...
Somebody who was a Muslim.
Ex-Muslim, okay.
An ex-Muslim basically is a dead Muslim. I mean, she has to sort of not publicize where she's going.
But is that happening a lot in Britain? Like people who say, you know what, I'm going to drink some beer. Like I used to gig with a comedian whose whole set was about the fact that he used to be a Muslim and then he discovered bacon. Like he hasn't been killed.
I think okay, bacon is one thing, but coming out and openly criticizing the harsher aspect or the more extreme sides of Islam in this country, I think.
But I'm not saying people in the Muslim community need to do that. I'm saying we should take the Muslim community at their word that they, like us, want us to crack down on Muslim extremism, Islamist extremism, as hard as possible. Deport anyone who commits a crime of any kind that's to do with that ideology, who's not a citizen of this country, up to and including stripping new citizens of British citizenship if they do so. We should be a lot harsher. I don't give a fuck about, this person doesn't have, the right to a family life might be infringed. I don't give a fuck. They're a terrorist. Get them out of this country. It's not complicated, right? Build prisons where you separate these people from the rest of the prisoners so they can't indoctrinate other prisoners in the jails. There are lots and lots of things we could... Hizb ut-Tahrir was only banned in Britain. This is an Islamist organization after October 7th. It'd been banned in every Muslim country in the world pretty much for decades. Right? Same with the Muslim Brotherhood, right? Same with the extremist imams. Just get these people out of our country or stop them from doing the extremist shit that they're doing and stop being afraid of offending the Muslim community. The Muslim community have told us they are interested in peaceful coexistence, and they're interested in getting rid of these Islamists just as we are. Great, let's work together.
I feel like we need to change our culture first, if politics in this sense is downstream of culture. And 13 years ago, Stacey Dooley was out and about going, look at all this. It's terrible what's happening, all these Muslims, all the things. You couldn't have a documentary like that today, I don't think.
You couldn't. But that's because, as I say, the criticism of extremists and Islamists has been positioned as criticism of Muslims. But what we should be saying is, no. We want to work with Muslims in this country to deal with Islamist extremists.
Oh, man. I just haven't seen an appetite. I'd like to see it that Muslim, because we've got, people.
Well, I know what you're going to say, but my argument is if we attempt that and we find that that isn't the case, then we clearly know that the problem isn't the Islamists.
Yeah.
And then we'll not have to worry about that anymore.
Then the problem would be Islam.
Well, the problem would be that there are quite a lot of people in the Muslim community who actually do support these extremists, which we're told they don't.
But we also, I think we know that 30 or 40% want Sharia law.
Is it 30 or 40%?
I think
Are you sure?
I'd have to check it again. I'll put a thing.
I'm not saying it's not true. It seems very high to me. I think you probably find it depends on how the question's asked.
It might be that they sympathize with Sharia law or something like that.
Yeah.
There's a high number. I mean, what I mean is when I was a kid, I was always told, just it's only 0.001% of this, and I don't think that's now. I think people are realizing that's not actually the case. It's not as small as we thought.
Well, my view is the government should be dealing very harshly with people who are Islamists and who want to overthrow the government and democracy and the right of women to walk around dressed the way they, etc. Like, if you are an extremist. And if you have terrorist links, you shouldn't be in this country. Or if you are in this country, you should be in a jail and never coming out of it. Just super harsh. Yeah. And there are places in the world that have dealt with this. Like I just came back from Uzbekistan. They don't have an Islamist problem. You know why? Because they make life intolerable for extremists. And you know where they go? They go to places where life is easier. Like
here.
Yeah.
That's. When you were saying about maybe the milder Muslim community, it got me thinking of Sadiq Khan and Hamza Yousaf, and those are people who I don't see speaking out against the extremes at all. That's why I'm a bit negative or a bit cynical. I feel depressed about this.
I understand where you're coming from. I'm just talking to you about the political approach that we ought to take. I think the political approach we ought to take is to take people at the word and act accordingly. We are told, and I'm happy to go along with this, that the vast majority of British Muslims are peaceful people. Great. and they are the biggest victims of Islamist terrorism. Great. Let's work together to deal with the problem of Islamist terrorism.
I think it will start a civil war.
What do you mean?
I think that's...
You think if the British government was to deport terrorists, it would start a civil war?
Well, we saw what happened in, this was actually the Romani community, when they came in and sort of said, look, those kids are not being treated well, let's take them out. It started all sorts of riots. Imagine if the police went into Islam, which is a far larger, I imagine it's a larger community, it might not actually be, I don't know, than the Romani community, I don't know.
I'd imagine so, yeah.
Around the country, all different cities, and said, look, you guys, out. That would be
But it's not you guys. It's like you have been found guilty of a terrorist crime or links with terrorism or funding terrorism or whatever. And because you've committed a crime, we're going to put you in jail or we're going to deport you.
You can see how it might lead to riots, though.
No, I can't. People get put into prison all the time. I just think they should be in there for longer. They should be treated very different. Like I keep hearing reports from prisons where people like this Ruda Cubana guy who stabbed the girls in Southport. I think he's just injured a prison officer.
A kettle.
With a kettle. Why the fuck has this guy got a kettle?
Just, yeah. Or at least he's eating, probably drinking the English tea.
I want that guy in a fucking Hannibal Lecter suit.
Yeah.
That's what I want. I'm sorry if this sounds like, people keep saying lately that the Russian in Konstantin's coming out. Yeah. I want that guy in a Hannibal Lecter suit.
I mean, that's a different thing. That's talking about that. That's the level of castigating somebody who's already been locked up.
It's not castigating. It's keeping him isolated from other prisoners, number one, keeping him from hurting other people, number two. And thirdly, I think that if you were to deport a lot of the people who are involved in this stuff, you'd very quickly find you don't have as much of a problem because people would stop messing around in that way.
Deporting that's a different thing, yeah.
Yeah. But that's one of them. Or you get locked up for life.
But our prisons are now overrun with Islamists.
Build more prisons.
It's a mess, though, we've got ourselves into.
I agree completely. None of this is to say I'm delighted about the fact that we have this issue. I'm not. And I think in some ways the people who talk about the changes that this country has experienced, it's happened in my lifetime. And when I look around, there are places I've been in this country where I think this isn't England.
Yeah.
That's a fact. People can go, oh, that's racist. No, it's not England.
I just spent a few days in Tintagel at Camelot Castle, which was one of the hotels that they turned down the offer to sort of have it turned into an illegal migrant centre. Right. So I went and just walked around and spoke to people. And it's amazing when you go to those villages, everybody knows each other. You know, the island of strangers thing over there. Everyone, they say, oh, go and speak to Ben up and, a few shops down. They leave their stuff outside the shop. And when they close up, because the high trust society.
Yeah.
This is so sad what's happening.
Yeah.
Shit. I don't know, man. Seeing it up close like that really brought it home. And that's what a lot of people spoke of the world being like, or the UK being like some time ago.
I agree. I think that putting that all down to exclusively to mass immigration is probably an exaggeration because a lot of it is to do with urbanization as well. The bigger the cities get, the less in contact people feel with their neighbors and stuff like that. But yeah, I agree. This is one of the reasons I don't actually live in London because I don't like that. And, the further out you go or when you go outside of London, there's a lot less of this kind of alienation that you feel. The way, when I walk around London, generally speaking, I have so many friends who've had their phone snatched out of their hand or been mugged or things like. I don't feel all that safe in London, really. Right. When I walk around in the small town where I live, I don't have that problem at all.
Can you imagine? I mean, those towns in Cornwall, especially. Yeah. And this particular one, they turned it down. They turned down the taxpayer money to turn this into it. Yeah. I mean, this is a really beautiful hotel, like with these wonderful views. I mean, it's just what an incentive to get that boat over to the UK to live somewhere like that. But other places like Newquay, that they have sold the hotels to migrant centres now. So it's just, I don't know. You can't. It's one of those acts that once you've done it, you can't ever really go back. Can you?
I think it's hard to go back. But as we talked about at the very beginning of our conversation, if reform get in, that's what they're going to have to deal with. And on illegal immigration, I absolutely think you can go back.
Yeah. Do you feel positive then about the future?
I always struggle with this because on a personal level, I always feel positive, like about my life and what I'm up to. I'm just temperamentally very optimistic and positive. Not optimistic, but I'm a positive person. I believe like we'll get through the challenges and whatever. At the level of the country, is difficult, Andrew, because first of all, I don't think there is any reason to necessarily believe that the next election will be as life-changing as people think. I think it's perfectly possible that one of the two major parties gets in, and at this point it doesn't really matter which. I think they'll just carry on with business as usual, potentially. And if that were to happen, I just think on some of these issues, you're right to point at them, which is there are points of no return, and we are getting closer and closer. So it really I think the next 4 years are going to be crucial. They're going to be crucial. And if by the time of the next election, all the four parties, the Lib Dems, Labour, Tory and Reform, if they basically all agree about certain things that need to be done about immigration, let's say, and therefore it's a consensus issue and actually gets done, that might turn this particular issue somewhat in the right direction. As I said to you before, I think economically, we are about to experience economic pain on a level that people your and I age have never experienced in this country. I think that's almost certainly the case.
So that is scary.
Yeah, but look, man, life isn't all. Look, it's easy for me to say because I'm reasonably comfortable financially, but people in the 70s would have felt that the country had gone to the dogs. It was a sick man of Europe, the 3-day work, people, and then there's a recovery. So there is the possibility of that. And it is always darkest before the dawn. So it's possible. I just don't know the way it's going to go. But what I can see is the economic situation is going to get pretty bad. And that may be what we need to wake up. So from that perspective, I'm actually not, I don't think the economy being, declining in size by 0.7% or whatever, or having even a small recession is necessarily in and of itself bad, because I just think we live in this cloud cuckoo land where you can push taxes up as high as you want. You can disincentivize business as much as you want. And people are going to, oh yeah, the rich, the rich. Okay, great, fine. You can slag off the rich all you want. The reality is, if you do not encourage people to start businesses, to create jobs, to create wealth, the country's going to be fucked. That's just a fact. There's no, where's the money going to come from? From more council jobs?
Yeah.
Or more jobs in the civil service? They don't create wealth.
It's a sort of failure to understand how wealth works, I think, isn't it? When there's this kind of, those people are rich, they must be taking the money from me.
Yeah. I think Britain has a very specific issue with this because it's a country that had a landed gentry at one point and a very isolated aristocracy in a way that America never had, for example. It's why they don't have this issue. In America, if you're rich, everyone's like, great. Oh, that's Andrew. He's rich. Oh, I'd love to be more like Andrew. Let me ask Andrew for some advice about how to do X, Y, Z. Right? I'm glad to be. Whereas in this country, we look at rich people and we sort of assume that they got rich by some sort of illicit scheme, or their granddad owned, the House of Lords or whatever. And that's something we definitely need to overcome, because it's just not true. Most rich people in this country are people who are rich because they've created things of value to their fellow citizens. And we have to encourage them to do more of that instead of punishing them for doing it.
Can you envisage any kind of future where you leave this country?
Sure.
Have you thought about it? Do you know where you might go?
It's not something that I intend to do. My view has always been that this country has been very good to me, and even if things are difficult, I would like to stay and do my best to resist the things that I don't like here, because that's what you do. I think when you're a citizen of a country, it's your duty to fight for it. Like if this country was invaded, I'd go and fight.
Would you?
Yeah. Wouldn't you?
What's the age they usually cut off at?
I don't know.
It's like something 40 something. I'm sort of been waiting to get to that age before I say, right, now we need to.
Well, something I talked about, I can't remember where I talked about this, but when I was applying for my British citizenship, no. When I was applying for indefinite leave to remain, the woman who was processing the application made a mistake. And we then had to go to a lawyer and appeal this mistake that was made. And the lawyer said to me, okay, Konstantin, so for this bit in the form, we just have to write down some things that kind of indicate how strongly you feel about this country, any connections you might have. You know, something that someone reading it would say, oh, this guy is, you know, he's really committed to being British. And I was like, well, you know, and I was probably, 20 something at the time, maybe 21. And I just thought about it and I was like, well, you know, if this country was invaded by a foreign hostile force, I'd sign up to defend it. And she went, yeah, let's not say that. That's too much.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well,
and that's when I knew there was a problem. So, yes, I mean, I take your point that I'm probably now too old and too useless to be useful in a military context.
Well, if you tell them about your rugby kind of.
But I've always said this. Yeah. And I don't see why, like, look at Ukraine. You know, I know friends in Ukraine who, when the war started, they got in their car, they got their wife in the car, they got their kids in the car, they drove to the border with Poland. They said goodbye to their family and they went back and signed up to fight. That's what a man's supposed to do when your country's invaded. That's what you're supposed to do, right? So for me, I think it's important to stay and fight as much as I can, in the small way that I can.
Have you lost any of those friends?
I know of people that have been killed. No one I know personally that's been killed. Yeah.
It's just a shit show, man.
But my point is, you're supposed to fight for your country in whatever way that is. So I'm not running away from Britain. It's tempting always. You know, you've got great opportunities in America. You've got this, you've got that. And also things, you know, have been pretty, like, yeah, I'm not going to lie to you. When I saw the riots and then the way the police treated the Muslim rioters who were doing their own thing and hiding weapons and masks, and they were, oh yeah, that's fine. Yeah, just don't bring him out here and all this stuff. I was like, we're on a very dangerous path. But, you know, I'm going to make sure that I'm here for as long as I possibly can be and doing my very best to prevent the terrible things that could happen.
I feel emotion in you when you speak about fighting to defend this country.
Yeah, of course. But that's what, this is what I'm saying. It's like, that's what we're all supposed to feel because it's our country.
Would you like a nation of Michaela schools, Catherine Birbal Singh's school, where she tries to get people to adapt and unify around a British identity?
I don't know enough about education to say, like, those are the only schools that should exist, but I'd really like what Catherine is doing. And I think if you think about the fact that Catherine's schools tend to have a mostly minority ethnic intake, so these are people who you might expect not to be able to buy into a British identity as easily as people whose ancestors have lived here for 1,000 years. That's amazing. So that certainly we would want, I think, to be available to all kids, definitely.
You started your book, To Alina, without whom nothing would be possible and everything would be pointless. That
was before my son was born, in fairness.
Well, let's include your son in this. Is love the ultimate thing? Is that everything? Does it conquer all?
I don't know what that means. What does it mean, conquer all? If you and I get into a sword fight, I don't think love is going to conquer anything.
That's true.
Do you know what I mean?
It was actually the weakest part of one of my favorite movies, Interstellar. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I have.
The love bit, I actually found it a bit silly.
Yeah, I don't know what that means, love will conquer all. In what way? Sorry, I'm sounding very like Jordan Peterson here, but what do you mean by love and what do you mean by conquer? What do you mean by all and what do you mean by all of it?
Did you opt not to do the impression of Jordan? Because people usually do it.
I can't do a good impression of Jordan.
What? Everyone does an impression of Jordan. Even Jordan does impressions of Jordan.
Yeah.
Francis told that story about Kermit the Frog.
Yeah. I know. I've just never tried, to be honest.
Well, okay, I know I won't. It's very tempting. I don't know exactly what it means. I just thought it starts with that, this book. I suppose,
No, what I was saying there is Alina, my wife, she's been like the person without whom I could never become the person that I am. My greatest source of joy. And so in that respect, yeah, sure. But Yeah, I don't know what that question means. Sorry if I'm being difficult. It's not intentional.
No, not at all. I don't know exactly what I mean by it. I just sort of wanted something vaguely not of the topics.
Right.
That's
So you're going to have to ask me a better question, Andrew. Sorry.
How old were you when you lost your virginity? No, right. Well, tell me first where people can find your show and everything.
On YouTube, Triggernometry. And my Substack is at konstantinkisin.com, where I write a lot of my own stuff. Yeah.
You're one of the best writers out there. I love it. I love that Substack. And I love your book, which is called...
You should know by now.
Yeah, but I just want to hear you say it.
No, I want to hear you say it. You love it, so you must remember it.
Love letter to the love. But this is why I'm not a debating champion. I can't do these things.
Look at him. Yeah, he probably hasn't even read it.
You got me squirming more than Katie Hopkins did.
That is a flattering comparison.
Did you see her have a go at me?
No.
Bloody hell.
What happened?
I can squirm.
Did she destroy you with facts and logic?
She destroyed me with, what did she say to me? I thought we were sort of on the same team in many respects. And then
Katie Hopkins?
Well, in some respects. I did ask her about some of the things she said I don't think she should have said.
Right. And how did she react?
Not well.
Not well. That's interesting.
But she didn't. I sort of asked her about it. She said she's been cancelled and all these things have happened to her. And I said, did it make you sad? Which I think she saw as glib. I don't know what. And then that was right near the beginning, and the whole thing went awry.
You love getting into the emotions of things, don't you? You want to find out.
I feel like
what animates people. Is that why you like it, or why are you into it?
It's what I most enjoy, because I'm trying to work out what's actually behind the face of everybody.
Right.
Does everybody?
So what's behind my face, Andrew?
I'm none the wiser after all this time.
Really?
Well, it's very hard. You've got, like you said it yourself, you've got a bravado, not a bravado, a skin or a shield.
I had that.
Okay.
I had that.
You're working on being more open.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I'm fascinated. You know, you've had that. I'm sure everybody has that.
I genuinely it's hard for some people to believe. I genuinely just say what I think.
Yeah, but that's very...
Which is to my detriment a lot of the time.
The thing is, I think I do as well, but in a very different way. And I can't explain how it's different.
My point is, there isn't everyone who knows me will tell you that I am exactly the same on trigonometry as I am off trigonometry.
Yes. But then I'm wondering, what is it to be Konstantin? What is it to be Jordan Peterson? What is it to be all of these people? So I do want to get to the emotions. Are they feeling fear? When you say, I want to go and fight for the country, I got my chest sort of tightened when you said that.
Why?
Because it brings up fear in me. I haven't mastered fear. And I'm interested.
Well, I'm not excited about going into a fucking trench, but I'm just saying that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Right.
But I'm just intrigued. Does it bring you that same kind of emotional, that same kind of curiosity, what it feels like to be other people? I think that's why I do.
Oh, I see. No, I'm mostly interested in whether what they're saying is true or not.
Yeah, I know.
That's kind of what drives me. Because I'm interested in finding out what the truth is. So when you come on our show, I'm kind of using you as a guest to try and shape my own views of the world. It's like an educational process for me. So I'll interrogate your ideas, but I almost never interrogate people, because I'm like, of course you're messy and you've said stupid shit and all this, because I'm genuinely not that interested. Right. But if you've made some kind of interesting decision, then I might be like, why did you have this person on your show, for example? Right. Or why did you just say, the Aboriginals are more human than Western people, as Deborah, or whatever. But
Katie Hopkins, we need a final solution for Islam, she said.
Really?
Yeah, I asked her about that. She was
what does she mean by that? What, like
she said she said she didn't think about the Nazi,
connotations.
Yeah, but she's extremely bright, so I wasn't having that. But then again, that's why I asked her that. Does it make you sad? I want to know, what is it? And I don't think I'm the only one to have that curiosity. I mean, John Ronson did an article about her. Is Katie Hopkins a psychopath?
You're very Louis Theroux, aren't you?
Yeah. Well, I watched him and I want to say, I felt I really related to him growing up. I could feel what he felt, but then everybody sort of feels a bit like that.
I don't.
You don't feel very.
I'm really incurious about like people as like humans. I'm interested in their ideas though.
It's interesting. Well, there's different styles of people and different types of curiosity. And I think both of us want to get to the truth. I want to we're just maybe getting there in different ways.
And different truth. You're trying to get to the truth of what a person is. I'm trying to get to the truth of what they're saying, I suppose.
Yeah. I just clarify that it's the same as you. I don't want to judge. I don't want to judge too much. I never want to sit next to someone and say, "Why did you do that thing? You're bad, and I'm good. I would have done it. I wouldn't do the thing you did." You know, I want to go. I genuinely want to know what it would be like to have my head inside your head, not sexually.
But I also think that saying that sometimes is fine too. Like, I might say to you, well, Andrew, I can't possibly understand why you'd have this person on your show.
Sure.
Can you explain it to me?
Yeah, but I think that is a question in good faith.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas I think I think
good faith is the most important thing.
Well, with Emily Maitlis, rather than if I'm Emily Maitlis, right? I've got Rupert Lowe on. This is finally someone on my podcast who can offer a different perspective. Finally, I'm going to treat my long-suffering listeners.
She's so naive.
With someone slightly different. Like, she's not thinking it obviously, but it is an opportunity for her to show something different. Yeah. And I would want to sit there and above just inspecting what Rupert Lowe's saying, I want to go like, why? What's in you? What's happening?
I think that's a really interesting way of doing it, not least because, particularly when you talk about politicians, quite often what drives them is not the ideas they have.
Yeah, with Rupert, I get the feeling it is the ideas, whether you like them or not. I feel like he's driven by this passion. He seems very passionate, and I'd like to. If I thought he was some sort of Nazi, as she appears to do, or she thinks he's a racist at least, I would want to go, what is it? Is it the amygdala that is short-circuiting and making you think everybody's going to get you, and or maybe you're right, Rupert. Maybe you've got some good points, but she didn't show that curiosity.
No, she didn't.
Who's a heretic you admire?
Salman Rushdie.
Oh, good one.
It sort of depends because people get tainted the longer they go in some ways. So you're better off like dying quite early, like Hitchens or someone like that.
Yeah.
I mean, Salman Rushdie is definitely would be top of the list for me.
It's difficult to read his books.
Yeah.
Challenging reads.
Yeah. Well, it feels a lot harder being him.
Well, I'd love to be in Salman's head. Well, not when it was, he was being attacked like that. Bloody hell. Bloody hell.
I'd love to be in his head when he's getting stabbed.
Unbelievable. But yeah. Well, that's a great heretic. People, go to Konstantin's thing, Triggernometry. He
knows how to say trigonometry. He's learned that at least.
Well, I knew that before it even started my show, didn't I? Where do you think I got all the ideas from? It's a wonderful show, and we all look up to it. And I've said this to you before. You paved the way for so many of us to speak. So go and, if you're not, most of you are subscribed, but go and subscribe to Triggernometry.
If you hate this show, it's our fault.
Hit the like button. Keep watching this channel.